What's going on, guys? Welcome back to WWE Network and Chill, where I, Graham Chias and Matthews, break down all the original content you watch on the WWE Network and on Peacock. And today we're talking the latest episode of Broken Skull Sessions, featuring, obviously, Stone Cold Steve Austin and his special guest, Mick Foley, from June 20th, 2021. This went up the Sunday of the Hell in a Cell pay-per-view, which is obviously very timely. I assume they did that on purpose, because Mick Foley is very much associated, to say the least, with Hell in a Cell, which they talk extensively about here on this episode. But yeah, I thought this was a good episode, and the timing was unfortunate because they just came out with a Mick Foley A&E biography documentary on him, like literally 2 or 3 weeks ago, which I have yet to watch. I haven't watched any of the A&E stuff yet. I watched some episodes of Most Wanted Treasures. I haven't watched any of the biographies, so the thing is, I was going to say that this was all new stuff for me, but I've also seen Mick Foley's WWE documentary, which is one of the best they've ever done, in my opinion. I know his backstory. I've heard about the Hell in a Cell match a million times from this company. So I didn't learn anything too new, and a lot of this episode was sharing stories, which is really the main appeal of the episode. If you don't like that sort of stuff, you might not care about it. You're not going to learn that much new about Mick Foley here on this episode, I don't think, even though it's around fucking 2 hours. It was a lengthy watch. But I thought it was really good. I really enjoyed it. They have great chemistry, do Steve and Mick. Mick is an awesome storyteller. He's one of my favorite authors. He's an amazing writer. So the fact he'd be a good storyteller in podcast form and interview form as well is no surprise. But yeah, this was really, really good. Again, not one of the most groundbreaking episodes they've done yet, but for the time that it was, around 2 hours, I enjoyed it. I liked the camaraderie between the two, and I thought it was very good. So apparently it's a 13-hour trip for Mick Foley to get from where he lives to get to Steve Austin's Broken Skull Ranch, or wherever the hell they filmed the show. But it was well worth it for him. Apparently this was recorded recently. You know, some of these I feel like they recorded months ago and they only put them up on the network like now or on Peacock, whatever. But no, like Steve, unless they got an early copy of it, and even then it would only be a month or two ago, he praised the A&E biography on Foley, which only aired like 2 or 3 weeks ago. So they must have done this recently and put it up on Sunday in time for Hell in a Cell. But Foley said that he was happy with it. And he talked about, he was worried about what the feedback would be because WWE already did for an All Mankind documentary on him on a DVD set like 8 years ago in 2013. Crazy to think it's been that long, but I think it might be on Peacock if you look around for it. Or at least not yet, but he was worried that it would be the same thing and people wouldn't like it, and that's also around 2 hours too. But he was happy with it. They made it different enough to where it wasn't the exact same material. Foley gets gifted by Austin a custom-made Winged Eagle WWE title belt. It's basically a Winged Eagle WWE title belt with like a bit of a hardcore title flavor to it with like tape on it. It's pretty damn cool, and Foley ends up keeping it, which is nice. I didn't go in detail with my notes here, probably a little less with this episode than others, just because a lot of these stories we've heard before, and I'm not going to retell the stories that Foley told here, like a lot worse than he did, because his stories are just better told by him specifically. But he talks about training with Dominic DeNucci, drawing inspiration from Bruiser Brody and Dynamite Kid and wanting to kind of merge their styles into his own, which is what led into the evolution of Cactus Jack and wrestling Kane years later and really finding his footing with the Cactus Jack character. He and Austin share a story about going to a gay beach with William Regal, like probably during their WCW days, because they had said that Steve had long blonde hair at the time. And Foley wasn't on the beach, but he was going to the beach to meet them, and apparently they didn't know it was a gay beach. And they even said multiple times, like, if this was today, like, who gives a shit? But back then it was a different dynamic. Like Regal and Steve were one. Regal, they said, was a good-looking dude back then, so you see Regal and Austin walking around like they're a couple, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's just amazing. It's just an amazing visual, and it's very funny. So that was probably one of the better stories they told here on the podcast. Foley tells some road stories involving or featuring Diamond Dallas Page. He talks about how he took chances with his own body by taking bumps on the floor, and how his own wife gave him advice, as well as Eddie Gilbert, helping him out as a babyface. He could be a good heel, but he really needed that connection with the crowd, and he got those tips from Eddie Gilbert. And his wife even mentioned, like, I know they may see you here, but I think you could be a lot more than that. And that advice really did him wonders, and without that advice, it's, there's a good chance he wouldn't be at the level, or he wouldn't have had the level of success that he did in wrestling. He had to make the crowd believe in him and really buy into his shit and really rally behind him. That was what he learned from Eddie Gilbert. He talks about his matches with Vader from many, many years ago, earlier on in his career, and believes that Vader is a first ballot WWE Hall of Famer, which he absolutely fucking is. He unfortunately passed 3 years ago, and I thought it was a lot sooner than that, but it was indeed 3 years ago. They have yet to induct him. Hopefully they will soon. It's a real shame they didn't induct him while he was still around. I think that's bullshit. But he said working with Vader was a real high point for his career, and he recalls in a match with Vader, I believe, losing his ear in the ropes at a WCW live event. We've heard this story a million times, but excuse me, but he talked about it here again and how he had a rush of adrenaline, and he came back afterward and he's like, oh, I just lost my fucking ear. And he never really swears, he had mentioned, and he said that multiple times before. But it was a hell of a moment, and they show the visual here too of Foley without his ear, which is fucking gross, and we've all seen the picture before, but if you haven't and you have a weak stomach, I would advise you probably not watch that part or you skip over it. He talks about leaving for ECW, and they talk about tournaments that ECW had at that point, I believe. He said that the crowd kind of expected too much out of him and the rest of the performers who would botch and fuck up their bodies, and they would chant, "You fucked up," and they would really take him to task with the ECW fans, with the ECW wrestlers, and that was what led to the whole Kane Dewey shit in ECW, and him doing that promo, and just a master promo was Foley at that point, and just always has been. Great storyteller. But that was really what led to that portion of his career with that infamous Kane Dewey promo. He said that what he's saying was all wrestling stuff, but the emotions he felt during those promos, were real. He said it was Jim Ross and very likely The Undertaker that got him into WWE. Taker was aware of his work. I think they worked together previously. He may have mentioned that here, and I just forgot. Because he talked about working with him in WWE and how he always knew it was an honor to work with him. He gets goosebumps thinking about it now, and how it was off to the races for Mankind's career once he linked up with Paul Bearer. He beat Taker twice earlier on in his career. He probably lost every match after that, but winning those first two matches really made Mankind a made man in WWE. And he never knew for sure whether Taker got him in the door at WWE, but he probably saw that he wanted someone to work with that wasn't just this lumbering giant, honestly, like a Giant Gonzalez or the Undertaker or any of these other guys. King Kong Bundy wasn't bad. Giant Gonzalez was fucking terrible. But Taker for fucking 5 or 6 years had worked with all these type of people. And it's like, dude, we got to move on to actual good matches here. Taker didn't have a lot of great matches in those first 5 years of his career. A lot of those matches were complete shit. So Mankind kind of broke away from the mold, and they had amazing chemistry together. They rewatched the Mind Games 1996 match that he had with Shawn Michaels, probably the best match in WWE history to end on a disqualification. Just a fantastic match, and a really underrated one at that, because I don't see enough people talking about it today. I wasn't around at that point. I mean, I was alive, but I wasn't watching wrestling. But having seen the match myself, I could tell you it's just an amazing match. He even says here that he regrets not facing Shawn Michaels or The Undertaker at a WrestleMania because of how great the chemistry they had was. That they had such amazing chemistry with Foley, Taker, and Shawn Michaels. He praised Shawn Michaels' selling and how the chemistry was there, as I mentioned. Growing up, he always wanted to be Shawn Michaels. And once Bruce Pritchard found out about his backstory about wanting to be like a Shawn Michaels-esque character, that was what led to the introduction on TV of Dude Love. So it was Foley's idea to do the shoot interview in character, because McMahon wanted him to do it out of character like they had done a few weeks earlier with someone else who I forget. I know the interview, I just don't remember off the top of my head. Oh, Goldust. They had done it with Dustin a couple weeks earlier. So they were going to do the same thing with Foley and have him kind of really ruin anything he had built up as Mankind and go in a completely different direction, but they did it in character, which was even better. It was a real challenge for Foley, and they made it fucking work. And after seeing that first part of the interview, Steve had told him at the time, you'll be a babyface in 3 weeks, which he was. He was beloved at that point. They showed the Dude Love debut on TV where he debuted as Steve Austin's partner and they won the tag titles together. He said he wore Bob Holly's boots out to the ring, the white boots, which was hilarious. WWE made that shirt for him in his debut. They made it on 2 days' notice. And they won the tag titles together that night. He said it was more fun being that character when he was a heel and he turned on Steve like about a year later, I think after WrestleMania. And they even rewatched Steve Austin versus Dude Love from Over the Edge 1998, which was another really good match. He said he worked extra hard during those big matches to make them memorable. And he wanted to top Taker and Shawn Michaels at Hell in a Cell. He knew that it wasn't going to be as good because it's still, in his opinion, the greatest cell match of all time, which it absolutely is. But at the very least, he didn't want to embarrass himself by facing Taker at King of the Ring 98 inside Hell in a Cell. And we've heard these stories before, but Terry Funk was the one who had recommended that he go to the top of the cell to start it off. He recommended that to Foley, and he did, and it was a great visual. He said he went on vacation right before, and it was such a weird dynamic. Like, he was at fucking Santa's Village, like, the day or two before the pay-per-view to really kind of give himself a break before the biggest match of his career. Santa's Village is great, by the way. There is one in New Hampshire, which I think is the one that Foley said that he went to. I think there's a few more across the country. That's the one that's closest to me. I actually went on vacation, not specifically there, but just New Hampshire in general, about 6 years ago, and it is a very fun place to go. I will say that, especially if you have kids. Maybe not, but it is a fun amusement park and very underrated in my opinion. Back to Hell in a Cell. They rewatched the match, obviously. They kind of just break apart, and I won't mention it all here, but they kind of do a play-by-play of everything that happened in the match and how the bad chokeslam job that Foley did in selling the chokeslam actually saved his fucking life. Because if he sold it as he normally would, he would have landed on the back of his head, over-rotated, and probably killed himself or at least ended his career. But because he took a bad bump and landed on his back or his ass or whatever, it saved his career, life, whatever. He didn't land flesh onto the thumbtacks initially when Taker did the backdrop or whatever, and Foley was on his back. He landed on the side, but then Foley, I don't know if he knew that he landed on the side or for whatever reason, just instinctively, he rolled around in the thumbtacks like a fool, which was hilarious. So because of that, he actually took an additional chokeslam on the tacks. He landed flush on the tacks that second time from Taker, and it was just an amazing visual. Getting that little kick out there with the little flip of the leg at the end when he was getting pinned by Taker, not kicking out, but making it look like he had the heart a little bit to kick out, which he didn't. So we mentioned that he was sensitive for a while, that he had only been known for that match. Not for, the next day, but, for the next few years. He had felt that that was the match that defined his career. That was the only thing he was ever asked about on a daily basis, doing talks and shit like that. And it took him, 10 years to finally kind of move on from that. And it wasn't until his boys wanted to watch the match after hearing his friends talk about it at school. Or their friends talk about it at school. So the boys sat down and watched the match. And after watching it with his boys, it doesn't bother him anymore that people rewatch that match because it was such a great match, and it really was a defining match in his career. But he had other defining matches in his career too. It's not like it was a one and done. That was the only good match he ever had. And it's not even really much of a match. I mean, it was more of a fucking massacre than anything. It was more of a storytelling masterpiece, in my opinion, than it was an actual 5-star classic match. They talk about the run-in he did later on that night at Hell in a Cell, or rather, fuck Hell in a Cell, the pay-per-view, not the match gimmick. So, because it doesn't really mean as much anymore, obviously. But he did a run-in later that night when, oh God, what was it? It was Steve Austin and Kane for the WWE Championship, which is hilarious. But yeah, so, he talks about that and how he interfered in that match, and it was just that's fucking psycho. I mean, obviously they wanted him to do that, but it was nuts. So, later on from there, after King of the Ring, he brought more warmth and kindness to the character. He talked to the storyline with Mr. McMahon, which was the debut of Mr. Sacco in the hospital. They rewatched that here, which was great, where he visited McMahon in the hospital. He called the I Quit match with The Rock from Royal Rumble 99 too much. You think? No shit. I mean, the match was fucking way too over the top. But the whole point of that feud with The Rock in early 99 when he won the championship, I was surprised that, they did rewatch when he won the championship. They did. I was thinking they didn't, but they did. I'm like, how do you not rewatch that? But his whole goal was to make The Rock more valuable, and he did. He was actually against the idea of him winning the championship back from Rock at Halftime Heat, because he's thinking in his head, why would you have The Rock lose the belt a month or two before his WrestleMania program? That just seems dumb to me. Only to lose it right back to The Rock. They did a bit too much of the hot potato with Rock and Foley that year. I don't know how fans would have reacted to that today. I don't know if I would be happy about it personally, but it made Mick Foley. It made Mankind at that point in time. So they talk about Tony Schiavone spoiling the ending of the match and the ratings kind of falling in their favor for Raw that night, and Schiavone later apologized, which was funny. But yeah, they rewatched the match and the ending of the title match and how he became a bigger star because of it. Foley became more endearing from there, and how he was really, he needed an opening for him to turn on The Rock after they started teaming up and doing the whole Rock and Sock shit. And he had an opening on SmackDown where The Rock's glasses fell, because The Rock never was ever vulnerable. That was the problem. So The Rock's glasses fell and he picked him up, but they cut that from SmackDown, so his opening was gone. He was looking for another opening on the show itself on Raw. But yeah, they talked more about Rock and Sock and rewatched some of their segments, and it was kind of during that run that he showed that it was okay to be different. He talked about writing his successful first book, that being Have a Nice Day. It was around that time where his back was acting up, his knees were bothering him, and his memory was starting to go. He had a bad match on TV with Al Snow, someone he's really close with, and it was around that time Vince was like, oh, you just had your last match. And he probably would have retired that right then and there had Austin not gone down with surgery. So Steve needed neck surgery. They needed top stars. They were building up Triple H, but they needed someone to build the bridge between late 99 and early 2000 when he had his WrestleMania match. So he ended up feuding with Foley. Foley came out of, he wasn't really retired yet, but it was determined that would be his final match. He called the street fight at the Royal Rumble one of his favorite matches. He wanted to go out he wanted to go out the way that people remembered him, which he did at No Way Out 2000 inside Hell in a Cell. And he mentioned that his brother and his dad were at his last match, actually. But when he got back to his hotel room later that night, he was all alone, and he said that he cried. He got in a better room than he normally would. He got some room service, and then he just cried alone because there was no one else with him that night. He felt the sense of loneliness. They talk about him coming out of retirement for WrestleMania 20, the Rock and Sock Evolution match. He says that he can't bring himself to watch it now because he hated his performance. He probably has watched it since. I thoroughly enjoy that match. And Foley wasn't like a rock star, but the guy looked pretty good considering it was a handicap match. So I never really understood why he hated that match so much. I know it wasn't No Way Out 2000, but hey, it was fucking better than WrestleMania 2000. I'll tell you that much. I don't know. I enjoyed that match. So the match that he had with Orton at Backlash the following month, the no disqualification, no holds barred street fight, was everything that he wanted it to be and more. He really felt that he helped elevate Orton and vice versa. He didn't elevate Foley, but he gave him the last match that he should have had. And then he came back 2 years later because he had never had a WrestleMania moment before. Shawn Michaels kind of brought that to light. Edge brought that up in the feud. And they had the WrestleMania 22 match. They rewatch it here. It was a great fucking match. They just talked about it. Edge and Foley did on Untold a few months ago. He admits that he should have been in better shape at the time, but it worked out that he was in the ring with a great opponent in Edge who could really carry him to a great match. And he told Edge that he loved him, or vice versa, I think at the end of the match after they went through the flaming table. So he was on cloud nine afterward. They worked amazingly well together, and it was a great moment for him to end his career on. He watched the rest of the show with Vern Gagne, and that was a hell of a moment for him. So that was really kind of one of those career things where it's like, holy shit, how did I get to this point, you know? He talked about staying in Chicago an extra night because they had the Raw in Chicago the next night. I don't think he was on that Raw, but he said he stayed over an extra night. Ended up wrestling again at One Night Stand with Edge against Dreamer, I think, and one of those tag team matches with Lita, I believe. He had a soft heel turn that summer in the feud with Rick, and he really wished that he had worked, that had been his last match. He wished he had worked his last match with Flair at SummerSlam, but he just couldn't help himself. So, of course, they talk about the TNA run. He debuted in TNA right after he was done on commentary in 2008. It wasn't really that bad of a run. I honestly think Flair's run in TNA was worse than Foley's. It wasn't nearly as embarrassing. Foley, I don't think I've ever seen the Abyss match he had at Bound for Glory 09. It was one of those hardcore fucking matches. Like, he didn't really have that terrible of a run. Flair's was far more embarrassing. He fucking needed the money. And Foley even mentioned that it was at a time when the economy was in the toilet. So he needed the money, I guess. He probably didn't save very well. But he said to this day he considers Dixie Carter a friend. And he does praise TNA. He doesn't shit all over it the same way that like Ric Flair has in the past. But TNA helped give people a platform like AJ Styles, Samoa Joe, got them to WWE. He even mentioned that TNA had more talent at the time in 2010, 2011 than WWE did. Which honestly is true. They had more star power than WWE did at that point. But they didn't have the fucking platform. So no one ever really watched the show. I mean, they had 1 million more viewers than they do now. But so did WWE. That's a different story. So he talked about talking to Vince on the phone, and how Vince said, "Oh, I know you hate me, but I would love you back," or something along those lines, or congrats on the success of your book, because they had mentioned Mick Foley's book on WWE TV when he was still in TNA, which was surprising. And that was what kind of led to him leaving TNA. He said he had a very good first year there, but he stopped believing in the company after a while. They got him out of his contract. They left him, he left with them, letting him out of his contract, I should say. Did some non-wrestling stuff after that. Ended up going back to WWE late 2011. Inducted him into the Hall of Fame in 2013. And he had mentioned that, 2013 has the best class in WWE Hall of Fame history, which is true. And he went down the whole class of people that were inducted that year. And in my mind, I'm thinking, who did they induct that year aside from the obvious ones? So he names everyone. He goes, it had the strongest Hall of Fame class. It had Bruno. We had Bob Backlund. We had Trish Stratus. We had Booker T. We had myself. And he ends there. But then it's just hilarious because obviously the only person he left out was Trump, and Trump went into the celebrity wing too. He wasn't going to fucking say Trump, and it wasn't like Trump made or break. He didn't make or break that Hall of Fame class. You have no reason to say his name. I just thought it was funny he left his name out. Just in the current political climate, but I thought that was hilarious. So anyway, he talked about how he didn't really have any guidelines for a speech, which was cool. He never thought he would be big. He would be back in that big of a crowd again at Madison Square Garden. Sold out the place, had a fantastic time, enjoyed his run as the GM, blah, blah, blah. Talks about doing stand-up, and he says it was all worth it in the end. His career, not just stand-up. But that was about it for the Foley episode of Broken Skull Sessions. It clocks in at around 2 hours. Again, if you've seen all the Foley documentaries, if you watched the biography on him on A&E a couple of weeks ago, it's probably much of the same stuff. But just hearing him tell stories is always great. Foley's a great storyteller, so it's worth watching for that alone. And Steve always brings the best out of his guests. So great stuff here, Broken Skull Sessions. Check it out right now on the WWE Network and on Peacock with Mick Foley. Be sure to like the video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more daily content, including hitting the bell button to be notified every time a new video goes up, including more exclusive interviews coming this week, so keep an eye out for those. Have an awesome one, guys. I'm Graham G.S. Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.